Okay, hi everyone. I guess you know, I'm Kristy Kun, and I'm a felt maker and living in Southern Oregon. I just want to, first of all, thank the NWDC for inviting me to present today and for all the work that they've done and putting this together, Nancy and Lois and Catherine especially. So let's see. I will start just showing this image of the cover of American Craft that Nancy mentioned in the introduction. This is a winter issue of American Craft, and I was invited to write a short essay for them. And then surprisingly, a few months later, they selected one of my photos for the cover. So that's how all of that came about, and it was a huge honor, and it's very exciting to see a craft magazine with felt so prominently presented. The piece that, this is the piece, the full-size piece that was shown on the cover. So I thought first I would share with you a little about what is felt, and I know I have a lot of felt makers here, and thanks to all of you for joining as well. So felt is a non-woven textile, and you've seen it in the craft store, you've probably experienced it in bags or hats. Handmade felt can be a flat material. It can also be a sculptural material, and it's created with wool fibers, and by using the scales on the wool fibers to tangle and lock the fibers into a mass of a textile. So wool is coated with fine microscopic scales, and by submerging the fibers into warm soapy water, the soap allows those scales to kind of lift from the surface of the wool, and with agitation we can rub those wool fibers until they tangle tightly into a dense textile. And here's just a little quick demonstration of that in action, simply making these felt balls. And this is a video I put together several years ago that's on the first thing on my YouTube channel. So we take wool fiber and a little soap and water, and I'll just let the video roll a little here. By chopping these fibers up into a shorter length, it's easy for them to sort of migrate and tangle together. So making a mass of fibers, and I ball it up and dip it into this warm soapy solution and drop it into the egg. Now this is the agitation that's happening to make the balls just by shaking the egg up, but by rubbing it by hand, you can also cause the same effect in the wool. And by rubbing and rubbing harder and tighter, the ball becomes smaller and more dense. So that's the basics of felt making, very simple explanation. But what I want to start with is where I started, and that was with an interest in woodworking. And so when I was 21, 22, I became interested in woodworking just by going to the bookstore and picking up magazines. So I started collecting magazines and reading magazines and getting books, and was interested in fine furniture building and cabinetry. But my experience was, I had no experience. I had not done any woodworking, but I just started sort of daydreaming about this and about being a woodworker myself. So I read a lot of books and I collected books, but I really had no experience putting my hands onto wood or working with the tools. So I decided to change that, and I moved from Nebraska to California, and the idea was to go to this school in Northern California where James Krenov, the author of these books, was the instructor. So I moved to California to join this program. But before I got down to that school, I was offered a job with a woodworker. And of course, I took advantage of that and started in the wood shop working with this man, Whit McLeod, and building furniture with him. And this is me, just, well, by judging by my pants and how dirty they are, several months into the job at the mortising machine. And we were making mortise and tenon furniture, which I'll explain a little more about in a few minutes, all out of reclaimed wood. Working with wine barrels and wine casks and redwood from different tanks or salvaged logs. So I was really, really into the machines and the work involved. I liked the physicality of woodworking and working with this large material. We worked with a lot of older industrial equipment that was refurbished. And so I just sort of stepped into this other person's dream and stayed there for a long time because I enjoyed the woodworking and what we were doing. This is a cask. So this is showing you some of the material that we were working with. We would go from Northern California further north in Humboldt County, where we lived. We would go down to Sonoma County and Napa and salvage these casks out of the wineries. The wineries were getting rid of these because they hadn't been used for many years after Prohibition. And usually they would want to revitalize the winery with smaller barrels that would be tight enough to hold the fluid again. So you can see here more of this material, water tank in the upper left-hand corner, small wine barrels, and then in the upper right, larger casks, and then Douglas fir timbers. And I enjoyed building and then also selling this furniture. So we started going to shows, and I was creating the marketing materials and just really started moving into doing it all. And then Whit became my husband, and we bought this property together, this light industrial property, and the business grew and grew and grew. And so there was a lot of this material around, these wine casks that would come up on big trucks. And this is some of the photography that I would have done. I took over marketing. So the photography and, running the business with several employees. I apprenticed with the upholsterer and learned those traditional techniques as well. I became interested in because we were working with arts and crafts furniture, tying to that period some of our sales promotional material. So we had a letterpress, and the cover here is printed on the letterpress, and I created the book design and sharing about the unique processes that we were doing with this wood, and tear sheets for designers, and building the website. And so I guess I'm sharing a lot of this because when we get to me building my own work and creating my own work, I already had all of these skills because I had done it with wood for this furniture business. Samples for clients, and I really enjoyed designing and packaging all of these. Again, another photo of the furniture that we were making. So it's very traditional arts and crafts, but a contemporary take on it, because of when working with the wine casks, the material is very unique. It has the stain of the wine on the surface, the inside surface of the oak, that we wanted to present and preserve as part of the furniture. So there was a lot of steam bending to get the boards to work properly for furniture. The twin tenons that you see in detail in the upper left again were unique to this furniture because they, the line of the chairs, traditionally in arts and crafts furniture, it might be a square tenon, but to follow the line of the furniture, there was unique joinery developed. This is a view in the shop. So you can see it was a big shop. There's a lot of industrial equipment. And we were always diversifying the work that we were doing. So making sure that when we were building the furniture and selling the furniture, we had the line of small folding chairs out of small barrels. We had a production line of the finer arts and crafts furniture. And then we were also running a dry kiln for local businesses, resawing and milling lumber for local businesses, just to make sure that if one thing wasn't working for a period of months, there was still enough coming in to keep the business running. So there's the resaw on the right side and the planer on the left and the back, and Penny and some furniture preparing to be shipped or possibly go to a show, and then doing the shows. So this is the American Craft Council show in San Francisco. And, we had a lot of fun designing the booth, and, I enjoyed the photography and the marketing and the posters, and it was really quite a thing, a good thing. But, not everything lasts. And we were also living on this property, and it was beautiful in a lot of ways, but very challenging. And there's Olivia, our daughter. So there she is. Olivia must be about 7 there with her little chicken. So, this didn't last for us. And Olivia, this is where felt starts to come in, because Olivia was going to a Waldorf school, and I started separating my time, and I had a little studio where I could have camps for the kids, and we did fibers, we did yarn, we did felting, we did letterpress there as well. So that was sort of the beginning of my transformation to fibers, although it wasn't about me making felt in any way. It was just a place to be and a place to support the kids at that time, and to take her away from that industrial environment, both of us, for part of the day. So when we did split permanently, I didn't walk away with industrial machines or a wood shop, but I did have a lot of wood. And I thought, well, my dream was being a woodworker. That's why I moved out to the West Coast in the first place, 13 years before. And so now I had this wood, and I knew how to build furniture, but I didn't have a shop, and I had a young child. So it wasn't the right thing for me to continue. And I wasn't really driven to do it either. I mean, I did try to come up with some designs, but I enjoyed working with the wood, but I wasn't a furniture designer. So I decided to put my energy somewhere else. And that was back to wool and fibers. So I took this wood and I sold it. So this is sort of my marketing flyer for all of this wood. And it was really special because they were the original casks in California's first wineries. So there's a lot of history there. And I preserved that history and, maintained the story when we were building the furniture, always kept that story with the furniture. And when I sold the wood, I was able to keep that provenance with it as well and pass that on to the new owners. So I took the money then that I had from selling this wood and bought wool. And I started a business because I thought, well, if I'm going to make felt now or someday be a felt maker, and I didn't know what that meant, I still had to have a business or a job and support my family. So I found a dye house in Italy, and there are about 100 colors of merino wool here. And on the bottom shelf are the same colors of wool blended with silk. And they didn't have, this was 2010, and they didn't have much representation in the States, really none at all. So I proposed that I would distribute for them and started this business, distributing their fiber to spinners and felters in North America. And I opened a little store. This is in the basement of a building, the Ford building in Portland. And I developed, I did I had all the skills, so I could do the photography, I could create a website, I could do the e-commerce, I could do shows because I had done shows in the past. So I had all of that experience that I could just apply to this new business, although it was quite different. And here is some of the shows that I was doing. So I would get bulk wool and then I would repackage it and travel to shows. This helped me build a mailing list because at the shows I could build a mailing list of, everyone who came into the booth wrote down their email. And, that mailing list I still use today because it applies to the work that I'm doing. So it was the beginning of creating a following, even though it's not the work that I ended up doing, that I'm doing now. And then hosting a lot of classes too. So I brought in instructors, from around the country, also international instructors that were very well known and for a specific type of felting. So whether it was wearables or rugs or sculptural pieces, there were always workshops going on. And I know that there are several people here who are students in those classes. And it's great so many years later to still have those connections. So this is Kelsey laying out a jacket in one of the first workshops. And then what this also did was it built community for me because I left that, that life in California behind. And it was a very unique life with, the wood shop, again, the letterpress, we had a foundry, there were always people around, creative ideas, and a lot of excitement and energy. And when I separated and started this new business and new life, I had to rebuild all of that. And I was excited to, I wanted to be a felt maker, but I didn't know what that meant because I hadn't yet seen something that struck me as, it didn't resonate with me in a way that I really wanted to make it and call it my own. So I just experienced what other people were making, and I learned so much from them, from their successes and their failures. You know, in a class like this where the ladies were making jackets, that taught me right away, like, you are not going to make wearables, because it was pretty challenging. There's a lot involved in wearables, and then just in the you know, the body image and creating work for the body. So the business just grew and expanded, and it was just still all business. And I was making balls of wool day after day after day and shipping balls of wool, which wasn't really what my dream was, but I learned a lot, again, just from being patient and waiting for the right time to make my own work. And at one of the shows where I was selling workshops, this man walked into my booth, Greg Wilbur, and he was excited about felt. He had seen a little felt before, but he hadn't seen what I was doing, which again was just samples. And he spent some time with me, and he said, well, you know, we do this great event. It's called a collab. And we get 40 to 100 artists together for a week, and we make collaborative artwork. And you have to pay to come, and you don't get to take any of the work home with you. And it's like, well, really? Okay, that sounds great. Because all I wanted was that community, again, like to be around some hard materials, I guess, some metal and some wood, and just to re-experience that. So, you know, I scraped up all the money I had and signed up and went to Frogwood. And this was 2016. I guess this was the first one that I did, this collaborative event that I participated in. And I've done a few more over the years. But it's, you know, woodworkers, wood turners, metalsmiths, weavers. Oh, this must be the second one that I did. Weavers, paper maker, we have Julie there. We just, so many different mediums coming together, sharing their skills and their excitement about what they do, and just coming away with full of inspiration and new experience. So after doing this event, I left, and I finally was able to put together those two parts of my life, that wood shop and this felting. So I went home, and Greg, I'll show you some photos, I guess, first of this event. So you'll just see the energy and the work coming out of it. There's blacksmithing, the woodworking. There's Judy, I said you would show up here. The weaving, but working with the welders. There's music, there's Christian in this one. Raising copper. Printing. Janet, weaving, sharing it with each other, and just having a great time. And again, to be back in this environment, you know, you saw the inside of the wood shop. You can see how I felt at home here. And it really inspired me to do the work that I'm doing. I built a website for them. And then Greg, back to Greg. So at the end of the event, Greg said, hey, Kristy, will show me some photos of what you're doing. Maybe I'll submit them to this event that I'm a part of. And I hadn't made any work, but I was so excited. And I went home and I got to work, and I had this idea about making a different way of making textured felt. And this is a detail showing on the right. You can see what I'm working with is wool that's needled with felting needles into a sheet. So it's fluffy wool sheets that I'm cutting, and then I'm attaching to more wool in the background and wet felting into a textured piece. And I'll show you again more of this process. So hopefully you can understand a little better. And this is that first piece that I made after leaving Frogwood. And I thought, wow, there's a lot of potential here in creating what interests me. And what really interested me was wood and wood grain, and you can see it right here. So I have this barn behind the house I was renting at the time, and I started working there. And I got a table saw because I needed to make the frames, and I just started, putting things back together to really have a working shop. And this is just a simple one of the first maple frames. Again, that textured felt that I was able to bring out from the surface and connect the joints to create new designs. And I'm working with wool, taking a little further. How can I have that texture, which you can see here underneath. I know how to do that now, but how can I add to that? So these are wool locks that are actually felted in at the base of the textured fins. I did a couple of these. This one is the same, although what I've done is I've taken those wool locks and I've just moved them into the fins after it was felted. So just creating that movement, again, the wood grain, and you start to see the water moving through these pieces. And the layouts got bigger and bigger. So this is how it happens. These strips of wool, pre-felt it's called, are fluffed on one side. And then with this little tool that has felting needles, I loosely attach it to a wool base. And after that layout is complete, then it goes on to the wet process. So needle felting will hold those fibers together, but it's not making a true felt, and it still needs a wet process where those fibers, warm soapy water where they kind of swim around together and they tangle and the scales lock, and it really makes that nice dense textile that you've seen. So it's a delicate process at first, because the water, when it goes on to all of this heavy wool, there's a lot of weight. So you can see I'm just wetting the joint at the beginning and carefully agitating those fibers at first before getting the entire piece wet and all of the texture wet. Because if I do that at the beginning, it'll just tear it off of the base. And this is the most important part of the design, is really getting that texture to adhere to the lower, to the backing. And then after it is attached, it goes on to the next round of felting, and then there's another round of felting, and just with every process round through rubbing, the water gets hotter, there's a little more soap, and there's a lot more muscle that goes into it. And I'm just pushing those fibers together more and more and more. And so here you'll just see boiling water going onto the felt. You can see already it's changed quite a bit from the last video. Soaping it up, and then I get more and more aggressive with my rubbing. This tool was designed by one of the instructors that I hosted in my studio during those early days, Pamela McGregor. So, all those classes that I was hosting, all those events that I was doing, those were my education in felt making. There was nowhere to learn felt making. You couldn't, you can travel the country going to different workshops, but I hosted the workshop. So I brought all of that knowledge right into my own studio, and I was able to pick and choose what I wanted to take from it. And then some things you don't learn in workshops and you just figure out on your own, like, well, now how am I going to cut this and get it to the right shape? So I track down different machinery. This is a power rotary cutter. I now have a second power rotor cutter that's on a track, and I use that for cutting the fins. And this is, something I bring from the wood shop. Again, is you saw the equipment, finding what tools you need to do a specific job. And I'm not overdoing it with the equipment in the studio, but just getting what I need to get the work done. And then this tool came from my daughter's tool chest, which is a straight iron. So coming in at the end when the piece is finished and really putting those details in and getting the felt nice and smooth, pressing it with the hot iron so it holds the shape just where I want it. And here's that finished piece. And this, often I'll create a design and then go back and repeat on a different scale or with different materials. So let's see, what is coming next? Okay, and you can see water moving through here, wood grain, mushroom gills, all inspired by nature, but not really representational. But again, going back to what I said before, what I really loved is the wood grain and chasing this, what you see here on the right side of the board, these stripes going through are the rays in the oak. And on the joiner, depending on how I would put the board over the joiner, you can kind of chase this pattern in the oak. And I could get lost in that for hours. And this is what I love about this kind of felting that I do, is that I can find these patterns and I can create, I really tried to create now these rays and this sparkle. So how can I do that in felt? Because I'm working, you've seen I've just been working with white wool, and now it was time to find a way to do something a little different, because I teach this, how you can buy this wool and make those pieces, but how can I do something that again is going to be uniquely mine? How can I combine different colors? I still keep my palette pretty neutral, but I wanted that little bit of sparkle on the edge of my felt. And here in the center, you see the gold fabric is a heavy woven silk. And by needling layers of these layers of material together and then creating the layout, I could get the silk just on the edge of my texture. Okay, so I'll show you what I mean by needling these layers. I bought this machine, it's called a felt loom, and this is my daughter Olivia, and she's going to run these materials through this machine. It has I just didn't want to talk over the sound. So this machine has 720 felting needles. And you can see from the photo before, I've got several layers of material that I'm putting through here. It goes into the rollers and the needles are coming down into this material that I've prepared. And the needles are pushing the fibers together so they hold together and become a single sheet. Now it's not really making true felt, it's making pre-felt. Again, it's just needled, it's not wet felted, which would be the final product. But I can take this material and I can cut it into strips, and then I can take those strips and attach them with my hand tool like I showed you before. And when it's felted and I do a lot of detail work on the edge, I can capture those rays in the oak, or like the sun hitting the water, the sun glitter on water. And that's really something that has excited me with felting, is not just to have a subtle detail. And it's really bright in this photo, but it's usually pretty subtle, and it's not something you see from a distance. You have to get close to it, and it's very touchable. And I'm a tactile person, which is why I love felting. So I want the people who experience the felt to enjoy that as well. So in this time, I also developed another product because, like I learned in the wood shop, diversify, right? Because if one thing isn't selling, maybe you have something else that will be. And so I developed this process for making flowers that I've taught quite a bit. Again, another thing to teach, a smaller piece that I can work on in the kitchen, not in the studio, and a lower price point if I'm doing shows. So it's just taking that same idea of creating the strips and making texture, but doing it in the round. And with the machine and being able to laminate those different materials of fabric and different colors of wool, I can put a lot of detail into these flowers. And then through this time, I found, because I'm interested in texture and working with texture, then I find other artists who maybe are doing it now or have done it in the past. And I found several weavers that have really inspired me. And, when I saw this work, Yugoslavian weaver, I thought, wow, this is what I'm doing, but it's so huge and so gorgeous, and it has so much drape. So again, however weavers do it, I don't know, taken a flat surface and made it with dimension and texture, and there's so much shadow play and movement that really inspired me. So what I could do is I could take a design and make it into felt. But what I wanted to do was not have a design, because then what I started seeing is photos of other people's work. Like, this is just a pile of textured weaving, basically. It wasn't a finished piece, but it was just the weaving slumped, and the weaving slumped here. And I thought, oh, how can I do that with my felt? Because my felt is so thick and dense that, what I've developed is a flat surface with a texture. And where I want to get is more movement and more sculpture, because I see the felt in the water, and it can move in the water, and it can breathe in the water. But when the piece is finished, it's still very textured and two-dimensional. So then I went back to, like sleepless nights, trying to figure out how to engineer a new textile in felt that had that movement that I was visioning. So if I could create this texture with a lightweight background and then sculpt it into the finished piece. And that's where the work has gone for the last couple of years. It's now dense felt into a very lightweight cotton cheesecloth, and it's made in a horizontal pattern and then sculpted into the final piece. So here's more of a detail of the back of that felt that I make. And sculpting. And this is my woodworking bench where I finished many chairs on this table, and I've kept it with me all these years. It's been a dining room table. It's been in several different studios, and this was actually just staged for the photo, but it's nice to have it in my life still. And just again, some of that movement that I can get with this new process of creating the felt. And this material still is made on that machine, where you see the detail, the black detail in between the white. inside the fin. So I'm layering different materials, making the strips, felting them into a lighter fabric, sculpting. And the sculpting is done with, it's finished with a gelatin sizing. So it's a milliner's product. It's a crystallized gelatin, and I boil water and dissolve the gelatin. I dip the felt into it and then shape it. And as it cures, it holds that shape. And depending on how much gelatin I use, you know, I could end up with cardboard or still something that's soft and rigid enough to be mounted in a frame and hold its shape. And then just experimenting with putting different cuts. You know, if I put cuts into the felt and I don't go all the way through that backing cheesecloth, how can I create more dimension and more interest and different designs? And then, and this is, you saw the wet felting process with the other pieces. Now with these pieces, because they are on a cheesecloth, which is so light and fragile, it's really important that during part of this felting process that there's buoyancy to it. So if I'm working flat on a table with this wet felt, it really easily, before it's densely felted, it will tear off of the cheesecloth. But by putting it in more water than you would normally use for felting, it'll float, and then I can approach it without tearing it apart. And I can even get aggressive with my felting in the pool of water, and because of the buoyancy, it's like being in a washing machine, sort of. So it helps those fibers move around, but it doesn't tear them apart. And then, of course, you know, my experience is with this material in the water so much. So now that I've moved to Southern Oregon and there's a pond in the back behind the house, I can take these pieces and have a little more fun with them and watch them in the water and see how they move on their own. And so that really inspires the work too, just seeing it come to life in this other dimension. And you can see again, all the ribs are running parallel. And it isn't until I start playing with it and sculpting it that the forms start to come to life. And then the next challenge that I had was, well, how do I mount these pieces? Because they float in the water, and if we're going to hang them on the wall, how can I do that and still allow the light to come through and to get that feeling of them being alive? So I developed a way of creating a panel. I have some of these made. What you see here on the felt before it's mounted is now just resting on this piece of acrylic, and there's a plastic over the acrylic, so it isn't scratched during this next period of processing. But I can take the sculpted felt and I put it on the acrylic panel and trace the outline and contour, and then with the router I go through and route this panel to fit the felt, and then I can mount it on there. And the acrylic is non-glare, so it's not a bright reflective acrylic. And what you see in the center of the back here is like a preliminary framework that I have the fabricating shop put on. So there's some structure to the back, and I can add a cleat and hang it on the wall, but it's not going to be visible when the piece is mounted. And so the benefit to having it mounted on acrylic is if it's on a dark wall or a light wall, it's just floating in the back and you don't see a background. This is a piece, this is just showing, I guess, different kind of rigging and jigging that I'll do to get the shape that I want resting inside of a panel. So if the panel is 30 inches and I want the artwork to come in 1.5 inches on each side, I'll use, cardboard or different pieces of foam and kind of space that out while I'm mounting it, so I know I can get a nice clean finish. And working on the details, and there I am in the studio. This is probably 2 months ago in the studio. And then wood enters my life again. So with my move to Southern Oregon, I'm living with my sweetheart, Christian Burchard, who is also a member of NWDC and who is probably still on this call, I hope. So Christian and I started collaborating, and this is just sort of in the garage, which isn't a beautiful photo, but you can see his stacks of wood from his long career as a sculptor and some drying racks. And so we go in together and find pieces that are going to become, instead of the acrylic on the back, the wood on the back of these pieces. And some of them, are flatter like I was holding, but you'll see in the next few photos also some really sculptural collaborations that we've been doing. I think this will just show Christian cutting the edge off on the saw, so skip that. But this is this is one of the collaborations. It's green madrone that he's working, and this piece is turned on a lathe, and then it's because the wood is green, it's malleable. It's the root structure of the madrone, so it has a lot of ideas of its own in the fibers about how it's going to shrink and bend, not flat, but it's going to move in all sorts of ways that Christian is really good at reading, but to me seem pretty unexpected and unpredictable. And it's been fascinating to put our two mediums together this way. Another one. And back to the flowers, kind of bringing that petal form in again and extending those petals that I was doing into tendrils and taking those tendrils into this new process of creating the felt in the cheesecloth and then adding it to the collaboration. It all comes together. Oh, this is Christian's shop. He didn't know that I took this photo this morning, but so Christian and I are doing shows together now, and I've been doing shows for many years, and I love doing shows, and with COVID we haven't been able to. And the Smithsonian Craft Show, which I was juried into at the beginning of the pandemic, has been canceled for 2 years, but hopefully in April Christian and I will be back there together with our individual works and our collaborative works. And then finally, I just wanted to share with you, I know I've had a long talk, and I appreciate you hanging in there with me. Another project that's coming up this summer, and it's through the Maryhill Museum of Art. It's called the Exquisite Gorge Project, and number 2, because they have done this before with printmakers. And this time around, they're doing it with fiber artists. So there are 11 or 12 fiber artists that have been invited to participate with the Maryhill and partnered up with various regional arts organizations. Each artist has a section of the Columbia River from the mouth to the confluence at the Snake River. And my section is at that end near Walla Walla. And my partner is the Arts Walla. And so what the artists are doing is creating really large pieces of fiber art that are going to be, that are three-dimensional, 8 feet by 4 feet by 4 feet. And they'll be exhibited with the regional art partner before they all come together at the beginning of August at Maryhill and form. It's taken from the Exquisite Corpse art idea and movement, and then they will be put together, not knowing how they connect to the neighboring artist's piece to form this vision of the Columbia River. So in my studio, I've been painting silks. Not sure how I'm going to use those yet in this piece, but you can see the book that I have there in the foreground about sort of in my research for this project and this section of the river. I guess it's that photo on the cover that's inspiring some of these silks and the sunset and the river itself. So next Saturday, I'll give another Zoom talk, and you're invited to join, and that it will specifically be about this project and where I'm going with it. Behind me is on the floor is the wood for the frame that I'll be putting together for that. So thanks again for joining me. We're going to have a question and answer session after this slide.